What's going on? Happy Hump Day. This is episode 3 of Over the Hump, where every Wednesday I'm going to be coming on to give you guys a little bit more information about a particular topic. Today we're talking about caffeine consumption and more specifically how to help you reduce caffeine consumption if you think that you're taking in a little bit too much. How do you know if you're taking in too much? Well, if you're watching this video, you probably are, because most people who are watching a video on caffeine intake are taking in too much caffeine. It's really easy to let our intake of caffeine slowly creep up over time because we become less and less responsive to the drug as we take in more. That's the case with most drugs. The problem with caffeine is it's extremely readily available and it's in all kinds of stuff now, most of which we enjoy either eating or drinking. And we've almost become just as addicted to the actual habit and ritual around consuming the caffeine as we have the caffeine itself. So I want to kind of break down how you can help to unwind that process and reduce your caffeine intake if you decide that it's necessary. First off, let's talk a little bit more about how caffeine actually works in the body and what it does. So I'm not going to get into the pharmacology and physiology too much on all this. It does block fatigue receptors. It doesn't necessarily give you energy. There's a lot of people out there that take the super sciencey route in explaining this, and honestly I think they miss the big picture entirely. I just want to reshape the way you think about caffeine. If I could literally just stop for a second if you're watching this and listen to me, this is the biggest takeaway. Caffeine, we have associated it with energy. We think about energy drinks, we think about pre-workouts giving us energy, we think about coffee giving us energy. Caffeine is not energy, it is stress. The stress response in our body is what gives us energy. So every time you're drinking a cup of coffee, you are drinking a cup of stress. You are purposely inducing a stress response in your body. That stress response, just like any normal stress response, gives us better mental clarity. It does give us better performance, and it does these things in the short term. You need to make the decision on whether or not you are stressing your system out too frequently and too much for it to maintain optimal health. All right, I'm going to repeat that because we don't hear that very often, but caffeine needs to be associated with stress. All of the benefits of caffeine that we get in the form of energy comes at the sacrifice of putting our body under stress to get the outcome of energy. That's a completely different shift for most of us in the way we think about caffeine consumption. So when we're ingesting caffeine, what's actually happening? We are increasing stress hormones such as adrenaline and noradrenaline, aka epinephrine and norepinephrine. We are also increasing cortisol, that fight or flight sympathetic nervous system response hormone, and we are also getting a dopamine hit. The combination of all of these factors is what gives us some of that boost in energy or mental clarity or performance that we are looking for out of these beverages or supplements that we're taking. So I'm not saying that it doesn't do those things. We just need to think differently about how it's accomplishing those things and whether or not we can justify doing that to our body over and over again. And I'm not going to sit here and bullshit you and tell you that I don't consume a lot of caffeine or that Caitlin doesn't consume a lot of caffeine, because to be real with you guys, we consume the shit out of caffeine, and we have for a pretty long time. I started taking higher doses of caffeine when I was really getting into bodybuilding around 2006, 2007, because it was in most of the pre-workout products that were around at the time. If anybody remembers the original Jack 3D, you know what I'm talking about. And that wasn't even just caffeine. Unfortunately, they were putting amphetamines in that shit. But anyway, beside the point. So when we're talking about caffeine consumption, the effects that take place in the short term have to be weighed out by the effects that take place in the long term. And what we have talked to you guys about so many times on this channel is that what works in the short term does not work in the long term. It does not work the same way. If it works really well for a week or a month, oftentimes when you span that out over the course of years, that same thing that worked can become the exact same thing that's causing the problems. All right, so I want to kind of drive this home with a couple examples so you guys can relate what I'm talking about. So how many of you guys have ever been there on your computer just working or you're reading, and somebody decides that it's going to be hilarious to just come scare the shit out of you? So all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're kind of relaxed, you're doing your thing, and you're in the zone, and they come up behind you and they're just boo, and you're like, Jesus. And all of a sudden you're very awake, right? That is a stress response. That's that fight or flight reaction of our sympathetic nervous system that wakes you up as if you were being all of a sudden a bear did that. Yeah, you'd actually need to get the heck out of there versus just beating the crap out of your friend. So anyway, another one would be if you're driving your car and maybe I don't know, a couple scenarios, right? Like if you're super tired and you've ever been there like me and you're like eating ice cubes and like sticking your head out the cold window and like turning up the radio real loud just to try to like mentally stay alert if you've been driving for a long time. And let's say like finally like a deer runs across the road in front of you and you almost just nail it. That is like much more of a stress response than like the ones that all of those are forms of stress. Like cold temperature is a form of stress. I'm sorry guys who love cryotherapy and don't know that, it's stressful. Loud noises, eating ice to make it's uncomfortable. But the deer was like more because you almost just crashed. And all of a sudden you got pulled out of it. You're not tired anymore and you're like, shit, that was close. I need to I gotta get zoned in again. Those are stress responses. Now, what caffeine does, caffeine is just an artificial version of those scenarios that we are taking in on purpose, but it's spread out over a longer period of time. So like thinking about it that way, how many of you like think it's a great idea that in the morning when you're like running late for work and you're like trying to get everything together and hopefully you're like putting your meals in your bag and you're running out the door and then you're like making sure the dog's in the house or whatever it is, but how many of you at that point in time are thinking, you know what sounds good? A cup of stress. That sounds perfect right now. Not many of us, right? Like, so that way we can drink our cup of stress while we're like sitting in stop and go traffic on the way to work and yelling at everyone for not going when it was yellow and like you still could have gone for sure. But anyway, how many of us feel like we need more stress in our lives? Not many. A lot of us feel like we need more energy in our lives because we already have too much stress. And that's the way I want to shift the way you're thinking about caffeine, because you're not really taking in energy. You're just sort of taking the paddles to an already stressed out system and just forcing it to go under more stress to give us the output of performance that we want. It's not always the best trade-off. I started taking high doses of caffeine around 2006, 2007 for bodybuilding pre-workouts. I didn't know anything about health at that point in time. And I was taking all of the pre-workout products that were on the market and thinking, gosh, these are fantastic, because you go in the gym and you feel like you could just like rip a barbell in half because you've got so much, of the adrenaline and noradrenaline pumping through your system from the stress response that you just took in. The difference is when you start taking in caffeine, for like 99% of us, you have a much healthier and more responsive system than you do now, right? Because over time, you are borrowing energy from your future self when you are ingesting caffeine all the time. That's true. Like physiologically, that's true. That energy has to come from somewhere and you can replenish it. It's kind of like crop rotation, right? Like if you guys know anything about farming, you can only plant like so many years of the same crop because you've depleted the minerals in the soil, and then you have to like give it a break or plant some different crops because over time you're pulling all the minerals out of the soil to get the crop that you want, to get that output. Well, we're constantly shocking our systems every time we're taking in caffeine, and it does pull some energy out of us for a while, but after a while you put the paddles on, you drink another Monster, and you're just like, I didn't do anything. Like I need a nap. And so that's when you know you kind of have a problem. So if I was going to give you one thing of how you know you need to reduce your caffeine intake, it's when you're no longer very responsive to caffeine, or you've gotten above 300 to 400 milligrams of caffeine intake per day and you're not getting either the results you want, or you're finding yourself chronically tired, or you're noticing that your sleep is getting disrupted at night, or if you're getting consistent headaches throughout the day and you think that it might be caffeine related. Caffeine does reduce blood flow into the brain. It's a vasoconstrictor, so is the sympathetic nervous system. But those are all things that you might want to look out for knowing that you need to reduce your caffeine intake. All right, hopefully you guys can see this okay. This graph is based on no actual study or data. It is based on my opinion, which is just as good, I think. So what we're looking at here, what I've drawn out, and I do think this is very valuable to think about, you've got cortisol on its sort of like daily rhythm. If you think about your circadian rhythms and some of the hormone responses in the body, this is somewhat what a normal cortisol response should look like. I've roughly graphed this out in 4-hour chunks. This is AM, this is PM. Cortisol is gonna spike naturally in the morning, and you'll have a couple, mid-afternoon or mid-morning, mid-afternoon spikes again, but it's ultimately going to come down at night. and allow us to go to sleep. That's also why your bug bites itch at night, is because cortisol is an anti-inflammatory hormone, and when your anti-inflammatory hormone bottoms out at night, your bug bites start to itch because they're inflamed. Not super helpful, but just kind of interesting. So this one is energy output. Okay, I don't know what your day looks like, so there's like, take this with a grain of salt. But most of us, this could also just kind of be a bell curve. But you're active in the morning, in the midday, and then in the evening, if you're not going to work out, you're kind of calming down and you're going to bed. The whole point of the energy output curve is that it's an inverse curve to your battery. I think this is helpful to think about. So think about your battery as being something that can be depleted and recharged. It starts full in the morning, assuming you actually slept, which most of you watching this, myself included, because of our high caffeine intake, we don't sleep super well. So this may or may not be actually full. Maybe this is full and this is us. So anyway, this is inversely related. As your battery is getting drained from your activity or energy output, eventually you're gonna have to flip that, right? So as the battery gets all the way drained, the energy output has to come down too, and then you recharge your battery, and then the energy output can come up again. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. Lastly, we have caffeine as a lightning bolt, as I drew it. And so caffeine, and here's the thing. Naturally, our cortisol rises in the morning anyway. And most of us are then also taking caffeine on top of that because we don't have enough cortisol rise in the morning, and we've kind of become addicted to that ritual of just waking up and having a cup of coffee or an energy drink or whatever it is. And that actually raises cortisol even more. But we don't really need this morning coffee. We just don't need it, guys. And so if you're gonna cut caffeine back, that is the place to do it. I really like the idea of stopping caffeine intake before like 1 or 2 p.m. So if I was gonna have you only have 1 dose of caffeine, it would be around noon. Like, I think that's a sweet spot. Maybe even 11, kind of that mid-morning drag. That would be a good time to have your caffeine. However, most of us go ahead and caffeine, guys, has a 6 to 10 hour, or I'm sorry, like a 6 hour half-life, right? So that means half of the drug has been metabolized in 6 hours. And that's different depending on your size. Caffeine has like one of those scales where it's different in terms of the amount of milligrams per kilogram per hour of metabolism. So you got to think about it in terms of if you're a smaller person and if you're a female, you typically metabolize caffeine slower than if you're a larger male. So you got to watch that too. Some smaller females, your caffeine half-life is very, very long. But the whole point is that drug is staying in your system for like at least 10 to 12 hours, regardless. So that's a long time. So by the time our half-life of caffeine has hit, we're usually taking another energy drink or something in the afternoon to peak us back out. And then we end up here. We have an even higher, dose of caffeine. And this is what I actually see people report to me, is that like they can fall asleep, right? Like, it's not that they can't fall asleep, it's that they wake up halfway through the night, and they can't really see how that could be equated to caffeine because they're waking up even farther away from when they consume the caffeine to when they're going to sleep. So if they can go to sleep, then they shouldn't be waking up from caffeine. This is what I feel like is happening in my body, and when I talk to people about it, this sort of makes sense. So it's just a good analogy. I'm not trying to claim that this is like scientific, but what happens is your energy, your battery is super depleted, right? And that's where I got my little sleep emoji over here. That you're able to go to sleep because you're just physically exhausted. That doesn't mean that your caffeine, this could be like even lower than it is, but your caffeine, circulating in your bloodstream is still not low, but you are able to go to sleep. And then as your battery starts to recharge, like the caffeine intake is still high. And then where is this? Where are you waking up, guys? Usually it's between like 2 and 3 a.m., something like that. So you've recharged your own energy enough. And then you're circulating like more of that stress response still in your body, and that wakes you back up at night. And then you can't go back to sleep because you've recharged your battery enough that you're not so exhausted that you actually have to go back to sleep, but you're not nearly awake enough that you can get through the full day with another like full charge of your battery. I hope that makes sense. Like, to me, this does do a pretty good job depicting like how we feel. Again, there are different physiological responses that are happening, but for those of you that are waking up in the middle of the night and you don't think it's related to your caffeine, I would really strongly encourage you to do a caffeine detox and see if that doesn't change. How long do you need to do a caffeine detox? At least 7 to 10 days to figure out if that's what really was going on. Your first couple days, you are going to have some withdrawal. Most of that's due to blood flow changes going to the brain, and just different processes in your body that are changing because you're no longer giving it that stress response all the time. But usually by 7 to 10 days, your sleep has improved a lot. So I would say if you give it that length of time, you at least know whether that sleep issue was related to your caffeine. So that would be like my first strategy though for caffeine reduction, is to take out your morning caffeine. That is the one that we really need the least, and it's gonna help our body get into a natural rhythm again of producing cortisol. Again, if you like your routines, not most, but a very big chunk of all this, guys, is based on the fact that humans are just very routine driven. We like our dopamine hits. We like our little rituals, especially if you're like a pre-workout person. You like your little pre-workout ritual for the most part of like drinking your energy drink or consuming the same pre-workout meals. We are creatures of habit. That quote has been around for a while for a reason. Do something else. Have a decaf coffee. Have a beverage in the morning that you like that is, equatable in taste to your energy drink, but does not have the caffeine. A lot of times doing electrolytes in the morning can give you a little bit of a boost of energy as well. That's something that has some salt in it, and some of the other electrolytes can be helpful. We like Ultima, Element, like LMNT is another one. But having a drink like that you like the flavor of, that can kind of keep you in that habit or that ritual a little bit, can be very helpful versus just being like, I'm not gonna have anything I like ever. Like that's a hard sell, right? Like, I'm just gonna take away all my things that I enjoy and then I'll be happier. It doesn't work. And I'm not gonna lie, guys, the flavors that are in these energy drinks are freaking awesome. Like, we all rant about it in the fitness community, but if they, like Alani, guys, if anybody's watching this, make a non-caffeinated Alani, like Monster Zeros. These things are freaking awesome. Like, make a non-caff Monster Zero. Bang used to do it, but then they quit. But we don't need any more caffeine, guys. Caffeine's in all kinds of stuff. It's in like energy bars. It's in all these energy chews that like runners take now. It's in sodas. It's in obviously energy drinks, coffee, like all types of stuff. Caffeine is everywhere. We're not hurting for sources of caffeine. So I would really love if some of these energy drink companies would start making products that tasted like energy drinks, and then we can battle the artificial flavor debate next week. But at least they would not have the caffeine in them, which is not stressing your system out so much. So I think that's a great place to start, though, is taking away this one and having your one dose of caffeine maybe mid-morning. And then another good option is to start going to every other day with your caffeine intake. One, I do think that you should take a period of time each year, as I'm about to do, to remove caffeine entirely from your system, just to give it like a full break from that. And then if you're somebody that really feels like you benefit from caffeine, I think every other day, particularly like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or whatever days you feel like you need it most. Typically, most of us don't need it on the weekends. Again, guys, like, you got to think, okay, our weekends are our day off to to recover from the stress we've had during the week. And if you can reframe the way you're thinking about it, what we don't need on our recovery days is a nice big cup of stress. We just don't need it. So do something else. Get into the habit of thinking about your caffeine consumption in that way, and that's what's going to start changing your life. So we've talked a little bit about that. Another thing that you can do would be to go with nootropics, or substances that can like mimic a little bit of the effects of caffeine without being caffeine. L-tyrosine is one that does a decent job. A vitamin B complex can give you energy via a different way. Electrolytes, again, as I discussed, can give you energy in different ways. The other thing that I would have you think about that I don't hear people talk about a lot is like L-carnitine, because L-carnitine is going to increase your energy by allowing you to basically shuttle more fat into the cell as fuel. And so you can come up with other ways, if you know how to kind of like hack the physiology a little bit, to give your body energy during the phases that you are trying to reduce caffeine. And then over time, as you actually start to sleep better and not stress yourself out so much during the day, and your adrenal glands get into a better place, then you're able to start not needing the caffeine. But in the beginning, it's gonna feel like you're doing a little bit of a rug pull to your body. There's just no way around that. You've got to have a bigger vision in place. And you've got to remind yourself that, again, while I am pulling more out of myself in the short term, I am potentially sacrificing what I'm going to be able to pull out of myself in the long term, because it does, like, that bill comes due, guys. There's no way around it. And you can't just keep stressing your system day after day after day and expect there to be no long-term effects down the road. And that's also why so many of the studies out there on caffeine don't really show some of what I'm talking about. Like, caffeine in the short term can help you to lose body fat. Caffeine in the long term, if taken like too frequently or too much, is absolutely going to help like cause body fat gain in a system that has been too stressed. If you're overstressed, those same mechanisms that help you to lose fat don't work anymore, and they actually go the other way because your body is already under too much stress and you're adding more stress to that system, and mobilizing body fat is not your priority anymore. You're in a sympathetic nervous system state, you're burning blood glucose and your metabolism's down regulating, and all these things are happening like over a long period of time, and the studies that they're doing aren't tracking people for that long. If you do a 30 or 60 day study on caffeine intake, your outcomes are not going to be the ones that we are talking about. But what did I just tell you guys? I've been taking high levels of caffeine since like 2006, 2007. And I, have some more functional health type issues from that in terms of energy that Caitlin and I are now working on because like of the fact that I've just kind of like depleted my system quite a bit. So she's going to come on a little bit more and talk about that in future videos. She's got some really cool supplements that she knows how to use to help restart and replenish that system in your body, and also give you a nice buffer if you're trying to reduce caffeine but you don't want to lose the energy. There's some good supplements out there that you can use simultaneously with that to give you the energy that you need. All right, guys, I'm out of time, but in conclusion, I really do. I like caffeine. It is something that I don't plan on not taking ever. It is something that for myself, I really want to reduce my overall consumption on a year calendar of. And that's how I want you guys to think about it. It's not like how much did I consume today or how much did I consume this week. You guys have got to zoom out, as I'm going to tell you so many times, and look at the big picture, because overall what we are trying to do is optimize the health of the organism. And while there are no detrimental health effects to the organism in one day of high caffeine consumption, there is very detrimental health to the organism over a chronic span of high caffeine consumption. And you guys just have to be aware of that in order to make the decision on how much you want to do. I know for so much of us, like our productivity at work or our productivity in the gym, we think about these things and we just can't imagine not having that daily energy that we really need. And that's the exact same mentality that has caused so many of us to get addicted to stimulants in general. Things like Adderall is not a different scenario. It's kind of the same thing. We're trying to just pull more and more energy out of ourselves and get ourselves to like optimize our performance, but we're doing that in the short term at the detriment to ourselves in the long term. So I really want you guys to try to make these decisions from an informed position and make sure that you are comfortable continuing to consume the caffeine intake. In terms of numbers, like I would really encourage you guys to try to stay under 200 milligrams a day. I know for some of you, like, what? That's one Alani. That's one Alani. All right. Again, talk to Alani. I don't know, but that's a good amount of caffeine. We start to see, digestive issues, sleep issues, all the issues I kind of referenced earlier, and there's a laundry list of more if you just want to Google it. But those start to come usually in that like higher ranges of caffeine. But again, I would say because of metabolism, everybody's a little different on that. All right, I'm starting to ramble. I hope this video was helpful. Thank you very much for watching. I know a lot of us out there are consuming too much caffeine. I do think it's something that we need to bring more awareness to and more information to, and just kind of like help each other out a little bit on coming up with other ideas and ways to limit the amount of stress that we are taking in on our body, and certainly other ways to help mitigate the stress that we do take in terms of increasing our parasympathetic activity, things like walking outside, meditating, reading, journaling, all the things that just help us to get relaxed, help us to get out of our head and into our body. This is a great time of year to be doing stuff like that, but those things can be just as valuable as reducing caffeine intake sometimes. And again, I'm not trying to talk you out of reducing caffeine intake, but I'm saying sometimes you are going to go through a push phase in life where you just know maybe there's a big deadline coming up, maybe there's a big work project, if you're an accountant and it's March, mid-March, and you're watching me do a video on reducing caffeine, good luck, right? It's not going to happen. You got shit to do. So I can understand that there are going to be seasons of push in your life. During those seasons, I'm okay doing stuff like higher caffeine intake as long as we are offsetting that with also doing some parasympathetic activities and remembering that in the big picture, there needs to be seasons of pullback. You can't just ask out of your body. Eventually, you have to give back so that the next time you ask, there's actually something there to give. So hope this video was helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back next week with another episode of Over the Hump.